the afflictions are the main cause. If we get rid of the afflictions, then we stop creating the contaminated karma, bring about the suffering. And then underneath the afflictions is a fundamental misunderstanding of how things exist. That's the root cause of all of our. Right now we're talking about the mental affliction. Next slide. So just a reminder, an affliction we talked about last time is an awareness that causes the mental continuum or the mind to be very unpeaceful when it arises. So our minds, in the absence of a mental affliction, our minds are relaxed and peaceful and calm. And when our minds become tense, when our minds become agitated, when our minds become uneasy, that's a sign of mental affliction has arisen, right? A mental affliction, it's the mental affliction that causes the uneasiness and the agitation to arise. In the next slide, is a review of a couple of quotes we covered last time, which brought some discussion. Afflictions are responsible for every suffering, every form of suffering and discontent we experience, according to Geshe Rapton. And His Holiness Dalai Lama says the most important thing for us to know is that afflictive emotion is our ultimate enemy and source of suffering. So that's the main point we have to realize, that the real destroyer of our happiness is always there within us. So as we mentioned last time, this is a really difficult point to get to, but very much worth pondering, right? So according to Buddhism, it's every form of suffering, every form of discontent, every form of irritation, every form of unhappiness, agitated unhappiness that we experience is ultimately a result of the mental affliction. So if we want stable happiness, if we want lasting happiness, if we want peace of mind and deep sense of well-being, then we need to work on our at our mental level. We need to work on our mental affliction. And once we really get that afflictions are the main source of our suffering, then we feel more motivated to work on our mind, to try to counteract the mental affliction. Because I find that one of the biggest obstacles to overcoming the mental afflictions is not wanting to. Just like not trying, not wanting to. It's like the current political climate. A dear friend of mine is still, is a wonderful person and has a lot of affliction around our president. Obviously not the only person, right? And I noticed that his mind does not want to counteract the affliction, like doesn't want to counteract the annoyance, doesn't want to counteract the disturbance of mind. And I think that that's true for all of us, or at least most of us, with various objects. We don't really want to counteract that. We kind of like the affliction. It's very familiar, and maybe it feels good, it feels powerful, it feels right. So it's useful to look underneath it and examine it. Bringing you happiness. In the short term and the long term. Because according to Buddhism, the afflictions will only bring suffering. So the more we become convinced of that, we need to reflect on that again and again. The more you become convinced of that, the more energy you have. All right, So the next slide mentions the three poisons, right? Attachment, aversion, or hatred, ignorance, or confusion. And the focus of today is going to be attachment. So let's go to the next slide. So other forms of attachment, other manifestations of attachment. Desirous attachment, craving, grasping, clinging, greed, or other, many. Next slide, just to give the definition of attachment. And all of you have gotten some teachings, or maybe a lot of teachings. Some of this will just feel like a review. But hopefully we'll go deeper. Get some insights, some further insights into attachment. So Geshe-Rapkin says that attachment is a distinct mental factor that, when referring to a contaminated phenomenon, over-exaggerates its attractiveness and then proceeds to wish for it with strong interest. So, there's the contaminated phenomenon. So the object of attachment is, a contaminated phenomenon is there are various presentations of what that means, but some, I think in this context, it means it's something that can increase the afflictions, which is kind of a circular definition. But like attachment, the affliction of attachment refers to objects, for example, but not like uncontaminated objects, holy objects like Buddhas. It's said that, that attachment doesn't refer to like the jewels. It refers to a contaminated phenomenon. And then there's the over-exaggeration, and then over-exaggeration of its attractiveness, and then proceeds to wish for and take strong interest in it. So we'll talk about the over-exaggeration in a moment. We talked about that last week as well. So attachment is, involves a stickiness. Like attachment is not just wanting something or liking something. Attachment, right, the affliction of attachment involves wanting it and not wanting to be separated from it. Let's go to the next slide, actually. There's two manifestations of that. It can be craving, right? Craving something we don't have, like craving ice cream, or, going shopping and craving, looking at, some object and craving, wanting it and craving it, wanting to have it. But it's not just wanting to have it, there's wanting to have it and not wanting to be separated from it. There's a stickiness, a glue there, that, right, it's like we're attracted to someone, there's a thinking they're attractive, and then there's wanting that person, right? And then there's needing to have that person, right? So just seeing that they're attractive and admiring them is not an affliction. But when it becomes an affliction is when there's like a strong hanging on and not wanting to let it go, or not able to let it go, right? And we all probably notice that when we have an affliction, right, we can't just let it go so easily. Yeah? There's a sticky. So it can be craving, something we don't have, or attachment and not wanting to separate from what we do have, right? So attachment in the sense of not wanting to separate from my loved ones, not wanting to separate from my status, my reputation, my wealth, my comfort, my security. There's a tightness, not one, like hanging on to it, not wanting to separate. The next slide. So attachment is a reaction or response to pleasure. So something, an object that we encounter that gives us pleasure, or anticipate. See an ad for the new iPhone, anticipate pleasure, and so based on that pleasure, then we react to it by cogitating about it, cogitating and exaggerating. First of all, we think that the attractiveness is in the object, right? We impute attractiveness onto the object. We attractiveness on the phone, and then we think that the attractiveness comes from the side of the phone, right? Like that the attractiveness is in the phone, in the object. We just imputed attractiveness onto the object, but then suddenly the object appears back as if it really is attractive, right? The chocolate ice cream appears as if the deliciousness is really in the ice cream. The attractiveness is really in the phone. The attractiveness is really in the beautiful car we just saw, or the new house that we have to have, or the attractive, is in the person that we desire for, or the attractiveness is in the job, in the status, in the comfort. So attachment is related to pleasure, but we experience the pleasure, and then on top of that, we exaggerate. I think that the pleasure comes from the object, the attractiveness is in the object, and then, and the more we exaggerate, the greater the attachment we have. So the exaggerate, like the greater, if we think, oh, this is the most beautiful thing in the world, however, that most likely to bring up attachments. And then the more we exaggerate, the greater attachment. Or it could be a subtler level of exaggeration where we just, we hang on to that as being inherently existent. And even though I know that ice cream is not inherently delicious, I know, like, not everybody loves ice cream, right? If it was inherently delicious, then everybody would love, everyone would. But, even though I know it's not delicious, but still, delicious from its own side, but still I'm hanging on to the concrete me that is experiencing concrete. That's an example. So the attachment arises not merely due to the pleasure, but it arises because we exaggerate. All right, so yeah. So what do you think about that? Is that true?
I mean, for me, that's a much more of a problem, a challenge for me than aversion, because the aversion, it's clear I don't want it. But when you talk about this, I think about like being in an intense attraction with a partner, like especially at the beginning, and it feels like, why would I not want more of this, even though I'm clearly going crazy? I'm driving and thinking about him, and I'm about to go off a cliff, and all these things that are clearly making me literally like lose my mind. but it feels good. And so it doesn't feel like it's harmful, right? Except for, you know, so that for me, that's much more, I'm less motivated to get rid of it, is what I would say.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the problem with attachment, is that it's associated with pleasure. So we don't really want to get rid of it. And actually I want to
The honey-covered razor blade type of thing.
yeah, the honey-covered razor blade, exactly. So I want to discuss the disadvantages of attachment a little bit later, but yeah, but that's a very important point.
Could you differentiate between, well, my teacher talks a lot about the desire, healthy desire and unhealthy desire. And I'm not sure I really know the demarcation.
Yeah,
I was going to ask the same.
yeah. And actually I'm going to go into that. So let's go to the next slide that actually addresses that somewhat. So there's this continuum of desire. Look at that. Right. Whereas we admire something, like initially, right, we see something for an attractive person, or a beautiful, bright, shiny object. So it starts with admiring, and then it may turn into, oh, I would like that. Pretty nice. I would like that. And then it can go stronger into want, need, have to have, can't live without. So, at a certain point on that continuum, it becomes a mental affliction. Right? At a certain point on that continuum, it becomes attachment, craving attachment, desirous attachment. Because desire is not necessarily attachment. So where on this continuum do you think that it starts becoming attachment? Where do you think it starts becoming a mental affliction?
Between want and need,
Okay.
maybe, or need and have to have. I'm not sure. It's blurry for me.
Any other thoughts?
That sounds right to me too. Like,
Yeah, same.
that would be pleasant. Like if we go out to a good restaurant, that would be great. But then when I need to go to that restaurant to be happy, it's now certainly become afflictive, right?
So, yeah, and I would say, and we probably all have our interpretations of these words, right? But in our experience, first of all, I want to say that it's really hard to know when we're attached to something. But in our experience, right, when we start feeling this attention, like when we start getting a little pushy, it's like, what restaurant do you want to go to? Oh, well, it doesn't really matter. Oh, but restaurant. Oh, that would be right. And when we start pushing, it's like, oh yeah, that's what I really want that. And right, and then we start getting like, I don't know how to say it other than sticky. Like we're not
But when you feel deprived, like at want for the restaurant, I don't feel deprived without it. If I need to go there, then I'm feeling like inadequate or something without it somehow.
No, I think that can be true. That can be true. I think that yeah, and it doesn't have to be, I don't know if it has to be that gross. I think I mean it's oftentimes we don't know that we're attached unless we don't get what we want. Right? It's like when we get what we want, see, attachment is said to sink in kind of gradually over time, and it sinks in like oil in cloth. It's insidious, and we sink into attachment without even knowing it, and we don't realize we're attached until we don't lose our object of attachment, or we don't get what we want, or if fear or anxiety are starting to arise, like fear of not getting what we want, or fear of losing, that's a really good sign that we're attached.
Yeah.
If there's tension, like I notice sometimes I'm sitting there and I'm relaxed, and suddenly I start feeling tense about, like if you're having let's say a political discussion with somebody, right? And it's, and it's not, you're not feeling any tension, you're just discussing. And then at a certain point, if a tension starts to arise, that's an indication, oh, I'm getting, like, an affliction is starting to rise. Attachment, right? Attachment to my idea is starting to arise. Or the friendly discussion starts to become an argument, right? Like there's a
See, and I mean, for me, using again, like the example of an attraction in a new relationship, right? That stickiness feels like you got I get what I wanted, time with this person, and it makes me very happy, and I don't even want them to leave. And then when they do, I'm thinking about that. It feels like if you could just have this, I'm with this person, this is wonderful, and then they walk out the door, they take like my thoughts of them with them. It's not like an obsession in my mind about that. That's what feels sticky, it's like as soon as you quit having what you want, you're anticipating when you can get it again. And like, is that part of it or no?
Yes, absolutely. The obsessive agitation about them is really is a strong sign, right? It's a sign that you've got an attachment going.
Right.
Yeah, it's like, the whole, the reason I put the pictures of the open hand versus the closed fist, right? The open hand is about, okay, I'm not attached. Like, I enjoy your company, right? I'm attached, and you're free, you're free to go. You're free to do what you need to do, and I'm not going to get upset about it.
Yeah.
And then attachment, slowly closing, and then it becomes more painful to let them go, right? Or we have more tension and more fear, and so I would say, like, the healthy desire would be admiring and liking, and wanting, some level of wanting could still be non-attachment. But then when it's a strongly wanted, it's like when you go into the grocery store, for me, going to the grocery store, going down the potato chip aisle, seeing the potato chips, and then feeling drawn to the potato chips, right? My attention going to the potato chips. And then starting to crave the potato chips. And then once you take the potato chips and put them in your cart, that's like, oftentimes that's a description for the difference between craving and grasping. Like craving the potato chips, but once you grab them and put them in your cart, then that's grasping. So and I think that grasping is definitely attachment. The craving may or may not be attachment, depending on how sticky it is. That's my feeling. Actually, I think craving, yeah, I would say that the craving, I think technically speaking is still attachment, but it's a light attachment.
Right.
Well, it starts off as a light attachment, right? But then the craving can turn into obsession, right? Endless cogitation, right? We see the ad for the bright shiny object, and we start thinking about it more and more and more until we actually reach out and go to the website and hit place order. Give our credit card. So
I mean, to Heather's point, I think I've reached a point where I know a car won't make me happy or a new cell phone. But a person, like if you experience heartbreak, you can't really talk yourself out of that, right? It's kind of somehow at a more emotional level or something like that, you know, like if someone really disappoints you, it's pretty hard just to say, well, you were attached and, you know, there you go again, and just have it go away.
yeah, absolutely. And that's, you know, and I'm not saying that we should be able to let go of attachment easily or at all at this point. So, yeah, I mean, I think people, and yeah, and oftentimes animals were most attached, right? Those are our deepest levels of attachment. And we'll get into that a little bit later. But yeah, and so it's easier to let go of attachment to objects, but harder to let go of attachment. And I think at this point, the idea is to try to reduce our attachment. To let go of attachment completely at this point is, yeah, I mean, like letting go of attachment to certain objects at this point may be possible. But to let go of all attachment completely does not happen until 8th Bodhisattva round.
But even
Happens after we directly realize emptiness. Right? So we're gonna have attachment for a long time, right? It's deeper than the other afflictions, right? Like the anger, it comes and it goes. Jealousy comes and it goes. Attachment is deeper and longer lasting. Like they say, it's like oil and cloth in that oil and cloth, like dirt is easier to get out of cloth, but oil is deeply embedded in it, and it's much harder to get out. And that's attachment. It sinks in slowly, then it becomes deeply embedded, especially with regard to people. So I think it's unrealistic to expect ourselves to be unattached to people. But what we can do is loosen our grip.
we wouldn't be human, right? If a beloved pet dies and we weren't heartbroken. I mean, I don't know if I'd want to be that kind of person.
Right. Yeah. And actually, I mean, let me see with let's go to 2 slides. Slides forward. Yeah. So let's talk about attachment versus love. So this is from Geshe Raptins. I hope you can read this. Geshe Raptins. So the first bullet, he said, okay, attachment is always characterized by the tendency to exaggerate. Whereas love, like if it's true love, you know, pure love, in the definition of, right, in Buddhism is love is about, right, wishing that other person, other being. love and compassion are based on a non-distorted awareness. So attachment, right, you're exaggerating their attractive qualities and you want them to exaggerate the good qualities. Whereas love and compassion isn't about exaggeration. It's, you know, it's about just wanting them to be happy however they are, right? It's not like needing them to change, needing them to be attractive, needing them to act a way. That is about wishing them to be happy. The second bullet, which is, although attachment may superficially take on the aspect of wanting to benefit others, it is essentially selfish, only striving to satiate one's own desires. Right? So attachment is, and the really about that, wanting that object or that person to make me happy. That person brings me pleasure. That person brings me a feeling of security. Makes me feel loved. Makes me feel included or belonging. Whereas love, you know, pure love is only concerned with their welfare, the welfare of others, not untainted by concern for oneself, without an agenda. Right? It's not about, I'll love you as long as you still make me happy. But love, pure love, or true love is about wanting them. And the third point is that attachment always results in suffering. There's a clinging that always results in suffering. So this is the thing about attachment, that we become attached to people, and the more attachment we have, the more pain we'll experience when we lose them. And I say when we lose them, because sooner or later we will. And that is one of the main points of the First Noble Truth, the suffering, the truth, nothing lasts. Nothing lasts. So this is a point that's very impactful for me, is that, attachment will always bring suffering because the object, we won't be able to keep. We use that object sooner or later. And the stronger we're attached, the more we suffer. And that's one of the fundamental misconceptions that causes suffering is we think that things which are actually impermanent, we think that things are going to last. Right, and not necessarily consciously, but subconsciously we're surprised when we end, which is an indication that we were expecting. So one big motivation for me to try to loosen my grip is, okay, this person is going to change, and I'm going to lose this person. So try to love them and love them more and reduce the And that's the idea, you know, in general, is to try to increase the love and decrease the attachment. Letting go of the attachment completely, I think, you know, with our loved ones, I think is impossible. I remember, I mean, I might have told you this. I mean, I remember during my studies, a classmate of mine, she was ordained and then she decided to disrobe and she went to our Lama and said, okay, well, I decided that I'm going to have relationships, so romantic relationships, without being attached. And he just laughed. And he said, impossible. So at our level, I think at our level, until we have a direct realization of emptiness, I think it's impossible to have you know, especially a romantic relationship without attachment. But the idea, as I said, is to have more, try to increase the love than decrease the attachment. Loosen our grip and, you know, and really try to promote the other's happiness and put our agenda on as much as we can. And then the final bullet under love and compassion is love and compassion, true love and compassion, pure love and compassion only increase our well-being. True love and compassion, expansiveness of the heart, that's not dependent on whether we have the person or not. Whether we have the person treats us well or not.
Emily, can you lift your
Easy to
voice?
say. So let's open that up for discussion.
Yeah, when I think about that, I think about my little nephews are 6 and 4, and and being their aunt is probably my favorite thing that I am. I just adore them. And I think about when I start to feel an attachment arise around how I'm just very aware of being too attached to them would be harmful to them. You know, trying to shape how they react to me would be harmful to them. And so I'm very aware of just being very spacious and letting them be who they want to be and just to be very present with them. And I'm very aware that they're just little guys now and that won't last forever. So everything about it is just unbelievably precious. And I feel like it's the most skillful I've ever been at loving another human because it is very non-attached, because I don't ever want to do anything that would be harmful to them. But that said, I'm still very attached to those two. I just adore them. And it's very important to me that I am always their favorite aunt by a very wide margin. So I ensure that I do everything to hold that station in their life forever. So it's kind of like, I think that's the best I've ever done at being on the continuum of love and compassion and not attachment. But I mean, it would be just preposterous for me to say that I'm not attached to them. And Emily, your voice was dropping a little bit just that last time, just to flag that for you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, good for you. Yeah, and little kids are yeah. Yeah, I mean, what you were saying, and yeah, and that's what right? That's a good indication, right? When we're trying to kind of leave them to be who they are, and encourage their happiness, encourage their talents and their interests, right? As long as they're not harmful, right? And try to let go of. Yeah. our agenda,
Right.
and trying to let go of needing them to like us.
Right.
Attachment as well. Needing them to love us, or needing to be the #1 priority. That's really hard. That's really, really hard. But that's our practice. And it's right, it's a joyful practice. I mean, as you were talking about your nephews, you can feel the love, you can feel the joy that you have in being with them. And I think that's the love part. The attachment part is where, oh gosh, I hope they always love me the best, you know, of all of them. That's the part where the tension can start, right? Because, oh, they start, right, when they're teenagers and they stop giving us so much attention and love, and that brings pain, and that's an indication of we inevitably have, right? And it's just useful to be aware of our orientation, where we have attachment, and just try to listen.
Yeah.
John, I'm interested in your thoughts on this based on your previous attachment. I mean, your previous comment about not wanting to.
Well, I think, you know, I can't remember the teacher, but some of his students were disappointed when he was distraught when his brother died. And they mentioned it to him, like, we're so disappointed. How can you feel this way? It must mean you're attached. And he laughed at them and said, you know nothing at all. So as far as I can tell, it's that you're going through the emotions, but you're not reifying them or not stuck in a repeating cycle. But you wouldn't be human if you didn't have them, right? Wasn't His Holiness sorry when his brother died? If memory serves. So.
Yeah, he was sad, and he mentioned, you know, when his guru Ling Rinpoche got sick, and the thought of dying was devastating. Yeah, and I think that what you said it sounds good to me, right? I mean, you still experience the grief, but it won't be as heavy, and it won't be, right, as obsessive and long lasting. But I think, yeah, inevitably when you love somebody deeply, you'll feel the sadness, certain amount of sadness when they're gone. But it's not going to throw you into.
Right, that you never recover from, right? I mean, you see that happen, right? In death, especially. The people never come back necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, I remember, I mean, I've told you the story before. And try not to repeat myself. Does this make sense, this presentation of attachment versus love?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's really helpful.
And that's what I mean, I thought that really clearly laid out the difference. So what else did I want to mention about attachment? So object, you know, I ran across this, oh, actually before I say this. So attachment, you know, our mind sinks, the object sinks into our mind, our mind becomes involved in the object, and our mind doesn't want to separate from the object. We're irresistibly drawn to the object. And craving, I think the craving is like an itch. We constantly need to scratch. Like we're constantly like the desirous attachment that's like that's itch. We're constantly reaching out for more objects of pleasure, like ice cream and the TV show and the Facebook likes, and right. So it's this constant seeking for pleasure, and attachment, and that's samsara, constantly, right, reaching out and looking for satisfaction from this object, and that gives me satisfaction for a short period of time, and then I need another thing, and then I need another thing, and I need another thing, and then I need another thing, and another thing, and it's endless following our attachments and thinking that the objects of our attachment bring us that final satisfaction, and they never do. We've already talked about that. Also, I wanted to bring up the difference between attachment, right? The attachment in Buddhism versus the healthy attachment talked about in Western psychology. I don't know a lot about Western psychology, but just to bring that up, like there's the healthy attachment between like mother and baby that's talked about in Western psychology, the healthy bonding between mother and child. So that's a different use of the word attachment. That attachment is healthy and it's necessary for survival of the baby, like that bonding, that closeness.
Well, it's interesting in psychology. I believe attachment theory now is one of the prevailing models for how to have love and happiness in your life, is finding out where you were scarred somehow, and then finding out what heals that in another person will somehow satisfy it, which strikes me as just how far different psychology and Buddhism are in lots of ways.
But I don't know what that is.
Yeah, you can Google attachment theory.
Yeah. I think that's a different use of the word attachment, though, John. From what I understand, right, there are the different attachment styles, and it's based on, right, your relationship with your parent, right? Like you have a healthy attachment, right? If you have a healthy attachment with your parents, then you're more likely to have healthy relationships in your life. But there's like avoidant attachment style, and those can cause scarring and it can create dysfunctional relationships. So you want to heal those things, and I think that's complete. I think that's consistent with Buddhism. Buddhism doesn't address those issues in particular. Buddhism, my thought about Buddhism is there's an assumption of a certain level of psychological health. Doesn't
Right.
deal with, like Western psychology is very helpful for getting you to the point where Buddhism can be. And I think that the two complement each other, and for a lot of people, they find that engaging in both psychotherapy and Buddhism is the optimal way.
Yeah, I guess there's different ways of looking at it, but like Venerable Bina says, psychology, if you go to a psychiatrist, they're going to assume a certain amount of anger and a certain amount of hate and a certain amount of, all these afflictive emotions, and just sort of somehow keeping it in check is reasonable, right? Like Freud said, the goal is just to be like mildly neurotic.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Right. Trying to get you back to like normal. Right.
Right. I suppose if you're really veering off the deep end, that's helpful. But I guess I'm a little more ambitious than just resigning myself to being just a moderately selfish person.
That's just such a broad brush as somebody that's just seen lots of therapists, and my current therapist is a Buddhist therapist, that I think if somebody's like not functioning, then it's a reasonable goal to get them to functioning, right? But if you're like a functioning person, there's lots of ways. Like when you talk about avoidant attachment, the way I understand that when we were in marriage counseling is just very pragmatic things. Like for me, when I get upset, I want to engage, I want to investigate. For Chad, he wanted to do the opposite of that. He needed to retreat and heal. So there's all kinds of way that you maybe what Emily was saying, like the ways that those terms are used, that I guess I always bristle at them being incompatible. Like the West is worse than the East or vice versa, or psychology versus Buddhism, when really it feels like they're all kind of trying to get at the same thing, and they can be integrated if in a really, in my experience, in a very sort of mutually reinforcing, mutually supportive way, if you have the right supports that are in alignment with your spiritual framework, you know.
As meant to, impugn all of the psychiatry.
Right.
Just I think there are certain epistemological differences that are interesting, but
Sure.
I think it depends too on the type, like Heather said. I mean, I think cognitive behavioral therapy is really very Buddhist in a lot of the principles. I know Justin actually used to talk about that in his teachings, and I've also found in like readings, there's lots of overlap. And I'm not sure too how much it's been influenced by Buddhism and by mindfulness. And so I've always found that. I think that's very different than like the Freudian approach, which is more traditional psychiatry, not this like slightly more modern approach. And that's certainly very different approach. So
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. And and I personally don't know enough about psychology that I certainly don't want to profess. But there are a lot of, there are a number of good books, kind of bringing together psychology and Buddhism. There's one by, Rob Priest has a lot of good books, right? I mean, I know John, you've attended a retreat by him. He's a Buddhist, as well as a psychotherapist. So he brings Jungian therapy and Buddhism together, right? There's a book called Eastern Practice on Western Ground by author's name right now, but he's also a Tibetan Buddhist and psychotherapist, and his book is really excellent on comparing the doctrines of bringing together the doctrines of Buddhism and psychology. Dan Siegel he wrote a great book called Mind Sight. He's a psychiatrist and a psychotherapist. He brings mindfulness into his
I think
session. So there's a lot of good writings on that.
just a quick plug for Rob Brees. Pre-COVID, I think he was going to come back to Vajrapani in 2021. And if you can make it, it's not to be missed.
That's the one you and Justin did, yeah? On Vajrasattva?
Yeah, just going through all these Vajrasattva practices in the body and
Cool.
Tibetan yoga. Yeah, like I wept at the end. It was incredible.
Very cool.
So actually, let's go some more. Let's talk about disadvantage of attachment. The next slide. Yeah, that one. So what's wrong with attachment? Attachment is associated with pleasure. It's like attachment, first of all, is difficult to see, and even difficult to see or detect, and even more difficult to want to get rid of. So why would we want to get rid of it? The first one I wanted to mention is actually what I already mentioned, is the more attachment we have, the more pain. Oh, shoot. I need to back up for a second. One thing I meant to mention for the disadvantages. So there's objects of attachment. So, we can be attached to almost anything. People, of course, our pets, of course, food, vacations, status, reputation, our opinions, our agenda. We can be attached to sports. We can be attached to Facebook likes. We can be attached to surfing the internet. Attached to money, attached to success or accomplishment, attached to almost anything. And there's this presentation of 4 types of clinging or grasping that I ran across the other day, and the first was like, grasping to pleasures and desirable objects. Okay, so that's the primary object we've been talking about: attachment to pleasure, attachment to the objects or people that bring us pleasure. The second category is grasping views. So this is a big one we see these days, and this is a big one that causes conflict. Political views, or philosophical views. This causes a lot of arguments between friends and partners, as well as non-friends. The third category is grasping to a self, and grasping to a concrete self, concrete me, which is the most insidious of all of the attachments. And then the fourth is grasping to rules and practices. I thought that was an interesting one, right? A lot of us are attached to rules, doing things the right way, wearing masks, getting upset if people aren't. So the stronger the attachment you have, the more likely we'll get angry, upset when our attachment is thwarted, right? When we don't get what we have. So it means like attachment lies underneath most of the other afflictions, right? So we're strongly attached, and we're strongly angry when we get or fear, anxiety is always a good clue that we're attached. Not realize we're attached when fear, anxiety. I wanted to mention that. Okay, other disadvantages of attachment. As long as we're attached, there's always a something changes or we lose. And then as attachment disturbs our peace of mind. And I want to actually do a meditation. Let's leave some, I don't know, we might have to wait. Or if we can go over just a little bit, do a meditation on attachment. Touch that uneasiness, the tension in the mind. And then with attachment, right, we can see that attachment can lead us to do unconstructive things, harmful things. Attachment is what really usually leads to lying or cheating, stretching the truth. Attachment is what leads to most of the scandals of the day, right? Attachment to power, attachment to reputation, attachment to status, attachment to money, right? That leads to strife. You can see very strong in the world. So much misbehavior is driven by attachment. Attachment is not so in. Attachment can lead to problems in our relationship. Attachment to our agenda, attachment needing the other person to be a particular way, needing putting our and trying to change that other person, needing that person to change, trying to control that other person. Or possessiveness comes from attachment. Need for control comes from attachment. Attachment is what keeps us in samsara. So what keeps us in samsara is, right, nobody else keeps us in samsara. We keep ourselves in samsara. Mainly because we don't want to be in samsara, because we enjoy following our attachment. And then attachments keep us from, like, attachments interfere with our ability to meditate, interfere with our ability to go deeper, interfere with our ability to actualize our highest. Like attachments are what bring us away when we're meditating. Our distractions in our meditation are usually driven by attachment. Oh, we're meditating, and we start thinking about what we want for breakfast, what we're going to eat for lunch, or we start thinking about vacation. On activities. So, and then finally, some antidotes to attachment. We can't miss that. So, let's go to the next slide. Actually, we talked about these. I'm going to skip this slide and go to 2 slides later. It says some antidotes to attachment. So the first one is contemplate the disadvantages of attachment. Right. So first we have to be convinced that attachment is not serving us well in order to even want to try to counteract it, in order to even try to reduce attachment. Second one we talked about last time, just being mindful of the pleasant feelings and thoughts. So attachment is a reaction to pleasure, as we were talking about earlier. It's a reaction to pleasure or anticipated pleasure. So we have pleasure, and then we cogitate about how beautiful or wonderful that object is, and then attachment, craving, grasping, attachment arises. So if we can learn to just be mindful of experiencing pleasure without the reaction of grasping, without the reaction of cogitating about how wonderful and beautiful that person or object is, and how much they're going to bring me happiness, and just either just mindful of the pleasure without engaging in all the cogitation, that in the exaggeration, or maybe that storyline will, an exaggeration will automatically happen due to habit, but we try not to engage in it. Be mindful of it and just watch those thoughts without getting sucked into those thoughts, without following the thought, right? Maintaining some distance from the thoughts instead of things. Next one, reflect on the impermanence. Right, one, that it's not going to last. That really helps me. Reminds me, okay, the more attached I am now, the more I'll suffer when it breaks, when it goes, when it leaves, when it dies. And I think, one thing that I recently started trying is that if I see a bright, shiny object that I'm attracted to, thinking of it as disintegrating. Thinking of that bright, shiny object as not always being a bright, shiny object. Thinking of it as aging, disintegrating. I'm sorry, I'm going fast on this. And then the next one is understanding the unsatisfactory nature of samsaric pleasures. So we already talked about that. And then the next slide is balancing our perspective, counteracting the exaggeration. So this one can be really, really helpful because when we're exaggerating the attractiveness of the object and we think that object is being 100%, or our minds are only focused on the attractiveness, and we're not seeing the object as it is. We're trying to balance our perspective, remembering, oh yeah, that house, when you have to pay mortgage on, it's going to keep me stress, and then that house is going to need a lot of maintenance, and right, so it's not just how beautiful the house is, or even that person, that person is so beautiful, so wonderful, and so perfect, thinking, oh yeah, and that person I have disagreements at times, we not always want the same thing, that person change, right? So that can balance out our perspective and reduce. And then, of course, emptiness. Emptiness is the ultimate antidote for all of the afflictions. And it only works if we can be strong. So, yeah. So, as we discussed last week and earlier today, to have realistic expectations, attachment will be here with us for a long time. Not to get down on ourselves for attachment, having attachment, to have kindness toward ourselves for having attachment, and the other afflictions, of course, we're going to have these things. The idea is to see that they're not serving us well, and they're the cause of all our pain and suffering, and try to reduce them. And with attachment, I think that like it's useful to identify what are the most problematic areas for us. The most problematic objects, right? So attachment may be bringing conflict in our relationship. So if we're having conflict in our relationships, it's really useful to then say, okay, well, what am I hanging on to? What am I attached to this? Or if we're experiencing a lot of stress, is there an attachment there that we can let go of or reduce? Are we experiencing like sickness, ulcers or heart issues that are in which attachment is contributing? So that's my thinking around attachment, is finding what are those areas, seeing what we're attached to. Right? Anger, maybe anger is an issue, a big issue for us. I'm trying to see what is our attachment that we can reduce. Fear, anxiety. What is the attachment? So, are you guys up for a meditation? Willing to stay on?
Yes.
Well, anyway, if you need to leave, just at the hour, go ahead and leave. We'll do a meditation. One other point I want to mention is that overcoming attachment, non-attachment does not mean indifference. Non-attachment does not mean indifference. Right? The idea is to grow the love, decrease the grasping. So keep the love, don't lose sight of the love. Don't become indifferent. That's not the idea. So let's sit in our meditation posture. On a breath for a few moments. See if you can produce a thought of attachment. Attachment to health, attachment to our appearance, perhaps. Young, or trim, good looking. Partner, our children, loved ones. Or it could be attachment to comfort. Well, for us, money, possessions, status. What could be or attachment to cleanliness, things being in order. Or it could be attachment to our political views. One. Attachment. notice how our object of attachment is associated with a feeling of pleasure, comfort, or feeling of security, happiness, pleasurable feeling. Feeling of being loved, order, supported, affirmation, validation, connection. Pleasurable feeling arises while anticipation arises and then you grasp, attached to the object. Associate that object with pleasure. Think that that pleasure, the attractiveness is in the object. From its own side. From its own side. They exaggerate that attractiveness. We're projecting attractiveness onto the object.
Emily, you're dropping again, or at least for me.
So we're
It
projecting,
may just.
we're projecting attractiveness onto the object. Because it's associated with a certain kind of pleasure or anticipation of pleasure, it's very difficult to be motivated to eliminate it, especially in and this attachment causes our mind to be disturbed or uneasy or unpeaceful. So see if you can notice that. If you keep your mind on the object of attachment, although there might be an experience of some pleasure, being grasped at in such a way that the mind is unpeaceful, uneasy, agitated. Notice maybe there's some anxiety, some fear, some tension, needing to have. fear of being without, or fear of being. Lack of freedom. Not being relaxed. Not being at ease. Finally, this space, we check deeply. At the deepest level, it's based on the sense of self, the sense of me, concrete me. My pleasure, my security. Attachment, there's unease, tightness, agitation, and also it's related to this concrete need and my pleasure and happiness. We can apply some antidotes. So remembering the objects, the people, the beings, the situation we're attached to are changing from moment to moment. Not static, not eventually we need to separate from our object of attachment. Material objects that were attached to age, scratch, damage, become worthless. object of attachment can only bring us satisfaction on a temporary basis. For a period of time. Not bring us lasting happiness. And imagine how it would be to be free from attachment. To have a sense of ease and relaxation, contentment. Not have that perpetual wanting, needing, be free of that itch we need to endlessly. Not have that dissatisfaction, feeling of incompleteness, boredom, restlessness. Drives that itch. Instead, to perpetually have that mind to ease, peace, relaxed, open, undisturbed with whatever happens. Not indifferent, agitated. Wanting to help, wanting to benefit, without grasping, without being attached or agenda, being free and at ease. This is something we can achieve eventually. Become more relaxing, loosen our control. Is that what we want? Any questions or comments on that before we dedicate? Were you able to contact any uneasiness or agitation associated with the attachment?
Yeah, I mean, I was, and what was interesting is the object was not one that I would have. It's not as obvious of an object. One of the things that I struggle with is feeling like I'm not going to have enough time or energy to do what I want with my life, and so I get very attached to that idea. And I mean, I didn't expect that that would be what would arise for me, was to have like this is energy. Like I don't know how else to explain it, but that I won't have enough of that to be able to finish my book, to, you know, all the things that I thought that was interesting, and it definitely was helpful to meditate on that.
Right, yeah, it's interesting what arises when we start really thinking about objects of attachment. Excellent.
You do still kind of trail off when we're doing the meditation, and I'm just sharing because I assume you want to know that it seems like you know, it's like when you start the sentence and you start the thought, then it's really clear, and it almost is like you don't want to yell at us during the meditation. So it's like your voice kind of trails, but I don't know, is that just me, or was that for other people too? Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, I'm
No, not at all.
trying.
I just assume you
Habit.
would want to know. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for letting me know.
We want to hear every single thing you have to say. So it's us being attached to everything you have to offer. It's the reason why I brought it up.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, I want to know. I want to know if you can't hear me, then I need to speak up. So thank you. You know, genuinely, thank you. Well, I'll try to keep mindful of that. All right. Does anybody? I'm sorry we've gone over. But just want to make sure nobody else has anything they wanted to bring up. All right, so let's. So,
Thank you, Emily. That was very helpful, you know, because we've had so many advanced teachings, but I always get a sense of something changing when I get teachings that are really where I'm at, and this teaching is where I'm at. So it's so helpful. Thank you.
oh, great. Yeah, I'm trying to find this balance because I think, you know, all of you have a certain level of, you know, the basic teachings, and I'm trying to, you know, give a little bit more information, and then the meditation is just so helpful, I think, and important. But we keep running out of time, so I wanted to definitely just bring it home to our own experience.
Thank you so much, Emily. I thought I liked especially that you brought up attachment to political views in light of the election coming. I think that's something we probably all struggle with. So I appreciate that. That resonated with me quite a bit.
Yeah. That one's huge in this country right now. Yeah. Thank you for your input. So let's dedicate. So any positive energy we've created, any merit we've created. Yeah. Nudging us along. Keep us progressing toward that ultimate state of stable, lasting well-being. And ultimately, enlightenment. And be the greatest. No. Thank you. Thanks for your patience.
Thank you, Emily.
Thank you.
Have a good week,
Yeah.
everybody.
So next week we'll talk about anger.
Can't wait.
All right. A fun topic. Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Emily. This was wonderful as always. Have a good day.